Today we're looking at Super Metroid and how it uses level design to help players navigate its expanding map. We start off with Crateria. Player heads to the right, they cannot move forward. There's a wall of a different type of tile than the ground and other walls, but it's not something they can shoot through or move, so Samus has to go to the left. Player goes through a blue door, which they can shoot open, which they've seen once before already on the ship introduction. They see tiny rocks blocking small paths. Samus cannot crawl, she cannot fit through the path, and they cannot shoot those rocks. They're immune to her blaster fire, so they can't go down either side, though they're both very interesting. They come to a large pit, and on the other side of the pit is a wall with the same type of texture they've seen on both by the ship to the right and also blocking that small path. They cannot shoot it. On their way down, there's a door they could definitely open, but they cannot get the door because, once again, the path is too small. They cannot crawl through it. Further down, there's a pink door. Blaster fire does not open it. There's a blue door, which does open. Once you go through it, the path is too small for Samus. She cannot crawl through it. You have to keep moving. It feels like you're exploring everything, and that's the beauty of Metroidvania as a action-adventure subgenre, is it makes players feel like they're exploring non-linear worlds when really there's always a critical path you're being pulled through. You fall down a very large path, which inevitably you'll have to climb back up. Metroidvanias, as a genre, they gate your progress not with keys and locks like Zelda might. They use something called gear gating, where the player must gain new items or abilities in order to open gates that block their progress. When Samus gets down to the bottom of the elevator, you're in the opening room for Metroid, which, just like Metroid 1, is blocked if you go right eventually by a pink door. If the player wants to really experiment, they can shoot through those blocks. They found blocks they can shoot through, but once again, there's a tiny path they can't crawl through, so they're forced to go left instead. This is what I like to call the Sakamoto method of game design. In this case, they put you down a long path, and the only way to get out of it is to learn how to do exactly the thing they want you to learn to do, and that gets out of there. If you don't learn to do it, you can't leave, which rather than having a level where you learn how to do it, they just immediately say, learn how to do this right now before you forget about it. The bad part of doing that is it's very strict, and it can feel mean to the player if they get stuck right away and they can't figure it out. But the great part about it is player, once they do accomplish it, they don't forget it because they immediately saw the application of the new ability that they got. You'll be pushed down a tiny crevice and have to learn the wall jump in order to get out of it eventually. So Samus can now turn into a ball, which means she can go to the bottommost door that we couldn't get to earlier. And once you get to this door, Samus can pick up a missile. And now that she picks up this missile, she can now open the pink doors. The player sees these and immediately remembers every place that they couldn't roll under before, and now every place that they couldn't open before because their blaster wasn't good enough, and they want to go revisit them. The player could have missed this and not picked up the missile, and that is a possibility, but they would have limited places they could go without the missiles. It's important when designing these games to make places memorable so that players remember the time that they couldn't open a certain door. Equally important is limiting the amount of locked gear gates a player ever sees at any given point in time. It's important that the designer, when making the entire map, never shows the player too many doors they cannot currently open at the same time. If you show them more than 3 things, there'll be way too many things in their memory that they think they need to come back to that they'll either stop trying to memorize them or they'll start to forget some of them. So the player can now use the missiles to unlock the pink door by firing 5 missiles at it. Once they fire 5 at it, it becomes a blue door, and they forever are able to just fire a regular shot at it. After this, the player now finally sees enemies for the first time, and for the most part, combat in this game is just a means to replenish resources, like missiles. The player once more learns to use the morph ball, and then gets a missile upgrade and learns that there's more similar missile collectibles elsewhere in the world. This part was technically Brinstar. Samus returns to the area from the end of Metroid, and now has to go deal with space pirates being everywhere. After a lot of platforming and shooting, Samus makes her way back up to the original hallway that she was in. These Metroid levels tend to have long vertical hallways since they are usually 2D platformers. Everything spokes out from them. Now Samus can return to the first pink door she saw and finally unlock it with missiles. An optional map room is now available, which teaches the player that they can fill out their map automatically if they explore. This makes them want to explore each area, not just follow the critical path, but maybe check out extra doors, even if they already found the next main step that they're supposed to go on. They'll want to check out other doors just in case to see if there's more map they can fill out, or hidden rooms, or a save room, which would be helpful. So Samus goes into this room. If she comes back in, you player still can't get through the challenge. Currently, though, they can make it through here, and they can shoot missiles down there, and they can fire things, and they can get into their morph ball. They cannot deal with those blocks that are down there. It's a different type of block. It looks different than the world. It's the one you saw at the beginning of the game, but for some reason, Samus's missiles and shots just don't do anything against it. And it's arbitrary, but it's just to teach you this is a different type of block. It looks different. It's always next to something else and having a different shade of gray on it. The player can find a save room by using the morph ball that they couldn't get to before. When the player returns to the top of the level, they still cannot open up the wall to the left side. Samus can now go down the small path you saw earlier that was forked into two and had that type of brick blocking one half. So this is once again that Sakamoto method of just pushing you down into this pit and not letting you out until you figured out how to get out. The first half of Super Metroid has a lot of points of no return, and these just keep the world simpler for the player. They don't need to memorize the entire world map. They just need to be familiar with the area they're currently in. After traversing to the right, Samus will find the Morph Ball Bomb. The bomb attack is what she's been missing. The player pretty much now knows how Super Metroid works. The flashing door once again tells the player it was locked before, but now it's unlocked. Finally, the player can destroy that type of brick they saw earlier. Well, where else have I seen that type of brick now that I know I can destroy it with the Morph Ball? The first place that we've seen it was over by the ship. They can run all the way back to their ship and go blow that wall up and have access to the whatever's on the other side to the right. If they do decide to go all the way to the right, they now hit their fourth type of obstacle, and it's only after they hit their mandatory third type that they see the fourth type. The green door was not shown to the player until they got the Morph Ball. The player heads to the left, which is the most likely place they'll go to. The player can now also return optionally to the room in which they entered using a regular blaster, but upon entering couldn't make their way through without the Morph Ball, and then once they had the Morph Ball, couldn't make their way through without the bombs because bricks were blocking the tunnel. Now they can blow up the rocks in the way and make their way through the other side of the room. Upon making their way through that hallway, the player gets a missile upgrade. This teaches the player and positively enforces them to explore more, because there won't be useless rooms in this game that are just there for no reason. Every room has a purpose. If you can't seem to progress, you need to come back later. Finally, the player can use the Morph Ball Bomb and make their way through that wall up on the left towards the top. Finally, moving to the left, they enter a big downhill slope. The color palette changes, becomes purple. There's a lot of enemies everywhere. And the reward for making your way through this gauntlet is an energy tank that expands Samus's health. It also lets you know that there's going to be much tougher challenges ahead. You then require missiles to defeat the next enemies, which are tall enough that Samus can't jump over them. They want you to know that sometimes enemies require missiles, so this room forces that to happen. Those enemies in their way are like walking gear gates. There's also a missile door at the bottom. Samus goes to the right through the missile door. You'll find a large concrete room with seemingly nothing in it. On the other side, you'll get through a blue door that you'll fight through, and then there's a big statue with glowing eyes, and maybe if the player looked at the box art long enough or read the manual or is familiar with the first game, they might recognize some of the bosses that are there, but maybe they don't. Maybe this room seems useless, but hopefully the player has seen enough to know that no room is useless in this game, and this is a room they need to come back to later and monitor, because there's some meaning here, even if they can't find anything. Furthermore, if they look at the map closely, they can see there's no bottom border on this room, even in the tiny mini-map. There's no bottom border, which implies that this floor beneath him, which is tiled differently than the walls and the ceiling, probably can be traversed through, though currently Samus doesn't have a way to do so. Heading to the left, to be honest, there's not really that much going on in this room, just another gauntlet of enemies. People like shooting stuff. Samus then runs into an elevator, and that is the end of Crateria. As the elevator goes down to the next area, the music will change. The city pop music will kick in to let you know that you're in a totally new area. So this concludes our look at Crateria, the opening area of Super Metroid. Thank you.